Hello and welcome to Writers and Books. I'm Kathy Sedna, the Communications Associate here. For those of you who are new to us, Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, a bookstore, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. You can find more information at our website, waab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions through the chat or Q&A function as well. Books are available through our bookstore, &Books. I'll put the link in the chat. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the Keeper of the Western Door. We're so happy to have Alicia Mountain with us tonight. First, you'll hear her read, then she'll be in conversation with author and poet Peter Connors, publisher and executive director of BOAAT Editions. Comprised of 4 heroic crowns of sonnets, Alicia Mountain's Four in Hand is both formal and experimental, ranging from lyric romantic and familial narratives to blank verses of reconfigured found text pulled from financial newsletter emails. Alicia Mountain's debut collection, High Ground Coward, was selected by Brenda Shaughnessy to win the Iowa Poetry Prize. Her chapbook, Thin Fire, was selected by Natalie Diaz. She was a Clemens Doctoral Fellow at the University of Denver and the 2020 to 2021 Artist in Residence at the University of Central Oklahoma. Mountain serves on the board of directors for Foglifter Journal and is a consulting editor at the Kenyon Review. She is a lesbian poet based in New York City, where she teaches at Columbia University and in the Writers Foundry MFA program at St. Joseph's College. Welcome, Alicia, and everyone enjoy.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Hi, friends and family. So nice to see you. Let me pin myself so I am seeing myself. There we go. I am so thrilled. This is my first reading of this book launch moment. And it's a real treat to get to be with you all over the country, all over the world. This is the new baby. This is the book. And it's a special one. It's different from work that I've done before. And so I'll admit that I'm still getting used to reading from it. I'm still kind of learning how to read from it. And this book contains mysteries even to me. So we'll get to kind of explore that together. I won't dilly-dally too much. I'm going to get to reading. Four in Hand is composed of 4 sections, and I think of them as 4 long poems that are made up of sonnets. And Peter and I will talk about form in our discussion with the Q&A. But that means that we only have 4 titles of poems that we're working with here. So rather than, quick one-off poems like you might be used to from my first book, instead we'll have these looping sonnets that kind of flow one into another. And I'm going to read a little chunk from the first section of the book, and we'll see if you pick up on some pattern in here. Okay. So we'll start with the first section in the book, or actually I'll start with one of the epigraphic quotes. This is from the poet Marilyn Hacker. Step back. The pattern in the tapestry won't tell itself till more of it is made. Marilyn Hacker. This is the first chunk of Traintown Howl. In a winter dream, months ago, she came, the queen in furs and braids, promising a betrayal song when the time was most right. Promising your betrothal would only bend a season for me. This train town is a howling in the night. It is a beehive alive with honeysuckle whispers, sweet, stinging. Your map doesn't stray like I do, but we were both drawn to scale, traced by your fingers for a path. We both fold small for safekeeping. Her prophecy said, run from your want. Whatever most right was, it waited. Whatever most right was, it waited until I skipped town south to sink in, to get me sprung on spring-heavy air like breath against neck, like my lank white girl hair sticking to your sweat. Daytime bathroom belt buckle betrayal, bodies inside bodies love, your hands. Now all I have here is Virginia, weeks and weeks of alone in breathy Virginia. When we were in love, men would ask if we were sisters. What a wicked way of denying what was already buried and plain. How I set a snare for the life they saw between us, held tight like too much hope. Between us, held tight like too much hope, and thunder sounds spanking the hills all year was a racket. House party borrowed bass beats and cheap tequila, no chaser, jumping in reservoirs, down on my knees, in the locker room shower, shoved up against locked office doors with you, landlock that wouldn't hold. Drive me to unburdened land, lake big enough to be an ocean. He can come, he who's in here too, to whom you are promised, the smoke dozing in your rafters. He can sleep in the back seat if you give me directions. The rough-faced friend I would never try to coax you from. I would never try to coax you from the hills so steep I lose my breath, where I breathe you to keep going. The Queen tells me not to drink the tidal push and pull from the leftover mug on your bedside. Who mouthed it last? What solemnity and grace did they avow? To what am I entitled? Did you name your book Volcano? The Queen promises an overripe rupture, full court press. The most I can say is no one's too old for high tops, the high water mark, the shore I couldn't start to see. The shore I couldn't start to see. The storm I couldn't feel until it had soaked me through, wrung me out. Once, my pink water-wrinkled hands lifted you onto the countertop. I write to you now from the counter of the Waffle House beside a battlefield and its reenactments. I watch myself on a security monitor, swiveling, my hat turned backwards. I think I will always look like a child when I am alone. I lick syrup. I know part of me is bad. The nearest train stops sinister at Lynchburg, named after a man. Hard to believe the less terrible, even when it's true. Believe the less terrible, even when it's true that I have been sweating every day, shrinking a little, drinking a little less. Even then, I wonder if my body is more possessive of you than of itself. At the gym, I drink watered down lemonade. To start the Stairmasters churning, I choose a setting called Life Quest and Level 5, because what am I trying to win? The Queen in my ear doesn't need me to bow my head to her. The stairs collapse and collapse beneath me. Does he build rough hills for you to climb? Do you recognize this book is a monument to touch? I think we'll pause that one there with this book is a monument to touch. So I bet you figured it out. That last line of one sonnet becomes the first line of the next sonnet. So when you have your own copy of the book, you'll turn the page and you'll know what's coming. The next section of the book is these skinny little poems, just one line per, or one word per line. So they're real scrawny. And this one's about eco-catastrophe, environmental crisis. And I'll give you just a couple of these. It's called Sparingly. Lips licked wet enough to whisper. We saw a bald eagle here once, remember? Remember the old faucet, the old night, and this new dripping fear, absent water. Water held a living architecture, bleached and starved without barriers, white flag for relief. Relief maps of fault sketch rock veins and ripples, seismic score marks for splitting. Splitting the harvest fed famine beside glut, made the empty dirt ashamed by that. That summer, wildfire pushed antelope herds over a cliff. There was no getting healed. Healed out of fever, we would still be mostly too late, but only mostly. One more. Mostly we too were enough love, both our bodies unsown. Imagine this as inheritance. So that one goes on, and those little skinnies kind of carve their way through to a culmination point. And what we haven't gotten to yet is the fact that each of these sections, those repeated lines, end up building on one another, and each of those repeated lines is used in the final sonnet of the cycle, and that becomes its own sonnet out of all those repeated lines. So they're each doing double duty. They're the last line of one page, first line of the next, and then they fall in that final sonnet of the section. Let's see if we'll end up there. I think we'll end up there at the end. We'll have a final poem that's one of the last. This section is called Initial Descent, and this one has a lot of different things going on in it. It's got politics, it's got work. This one's kind of dealing with like teaching college students, teaching elementary school students, figuring out what it is to be a poet, and what it is to be an American, all those things. Let's start here. So this poem kind of takes place on an airplane in turbulence, and me feeling anxious as the plane is like shaken, and me freaking out a little bit about that. So let's see. Okay, we'll start here. I'm going to start in the middle of this one. With no metaphor for who is victim to our fear, the material scarcity fixation of the wealthy has me convention center joking. Poetry, I'm in it for the tote bags. My latest canvas reward is black with Guernica on the side. The journal, not the Picasso. And if not the painting, then the bombing itself? If not that bombing, the name of a civilian village on market day? On Tuesday, in my tie, I put a whiteboard marker in this tote bag so that when I get to the 8-year-olds, I can draw a cat for attention. They like the cat. I want to tell them, I take it back. I don't like killing. I just like it when you laugh. I draw another cat sitting on the first cat's head. 8-year-old says, "What are you doing?" What am I doing? Trying to make you love poems. What am I doing trying to make you love poems? Trying to make you blue blood poems? Trying to say you fell in the shower and didn't get clean? When you were my young forefather, you counted your worth in zeros, a spreadsheet love poem for baby girl. And there are many ways in which you pulled the gilded lever beside the bake sale for your zeros, not for the torches or the cages or the groping brags, not for what makes me unknow you. When I ask what you would have tattooed on you, hypothetically, you draw the letters DR and CR on your wrists, debits and credits respectively, a guide for obsolete accounting. I want to scrub these indelible marks, body monuments imagined. Indelible marks, body monuments imagined. Itching, even after our shared chickenpox scarred a little and receded. In the family album, we are both shirtless and calamined together. Forefather 6 foot tall and pouting, baby girl wearing oven mitts. How the small virus offered vindication for the bare-chestedness I envied in others, scratching and sticky, but half my body made free. When I was too short to reach, did you pull the polling place levers you thought would provide for me? Do you know the violet protection I still want from you? The flotation device doubling as seat cushion, the oxygen mask? Do you know you're still my forefather, a cattle guard wake up? So that one goes on, goes on further. You get a lot of other threads in there. But that section has my dad in it. And so I went into the archives and I pulled out this baby Alicia and baby dad picture. And there's the guy. And for good measure, because mom's on the reading Zoom. Here's baby Alicia and baby mom also. Shout out to all my family members who are here. I appreciate it. And so I'll quickly turn to the last section, and then I think it's probably time for Peter and I to do some talking and for you all to ask some questions. And when you do ask questions, go ahead and change your chat to everyone. If you want everyone to see your comments. If you want them just to be for hosts and panelists, then we'll just be the ones to read them. This last section, we'll talk about where all the language comes from, because it feels a little different from my voice that's in the rest of the book and in the rest of my work. But I think for this, I'll read you the very end of the book. And this is this section, we've been channeling this guiding voice. We've been channeling this guiding voice that is kind of the voice of the poet James Merrill. And kind of by way of a tech jargon. And that guiding voice was kind of just talking me through a tough time in life as the pandemic was starting to set in. Let's see. From shock and fears awake, you generous emotions broker dealer, underweight Olympian. The symbol bull and bear at war in you are coming to a truce. If this has been an education, may its lessons be resilience won't protect you from the threat, but better, it will lift you up from stumble, set you on the track to run, to trip again, the hurdles high. Alive is like this. Optimistic bull, you need not fight the negative in you. That part, take it as partner. If you do, it will not pierce you. When the day breaks, shape with hope this rolling wave of confidence. With hope, this rolling wave of confidence arises to split us from you. These months of searching for the note in newsletter that uncovers your specific gold? Enough. Delete. Retire our help to junk. And as you do, project a death on this much needed end. It isn't us, nor is it Merrill coming to a close. By now, it's fair to say your eye for deficit and rules, for format as reliable, for us as virtually company, that it made up a getaway from real life flux. Your independence calls you back. It takes you by your sharp parts, points you home. It takes you by your sharp part, points you home, the flood, horizon looking weathered now and rational. This small portfolio of storms is giving way, and we may just be robots you've invested stories in, but this was never fraud. We've come to know you. Sensitive, ambitious. You are not the first with complex inspiration. Reach for letter after letter, rally text and choice without us. When you long for our internal holdings, ask more, risk an emphasis. Do not reply. Go strong, assured across the current, signing off sincerely. Honest bull, be safe, be well. And then this is the last poem in the book. So it's each line from those previous sonnets. You, bull bear, you've received new statements here. Our messages of episodic care in email. What is waiting here? What's found? You may not turn euphoric. Still, you could give love, be loved, and keep your trust in trust along a path that's been made clear for you. Create the signposts. Mark them as you go outside the page of what you can control. A softening away from vigilance, from individual, become a team. Leave footprints all together. Save your world from shock and fears. Awake you generous with hope. This rolling wave of confidence. It takes you by your sharp part, points you home. The end. The end of this book with a bunch of meat left to chew on in between. So I'll welcome Peter into conversation with me. And Peter's from BOAAT, my press.
That was excellent. So great hearing those in your voice, Alicia. That's a real treat. And wow, I don't know who Becca Mountain is to you, but I'm so unbelievably charmed by her enthusiasm. I just want to hug her.
Oh yeah, that's my little sister. That's
okay.
one of my two little sisters.
She's a fan.
Well, she and Jamie Mountain, Becca Mountain and Jamie Mountain get the dedication in this book. They're the ones.
That's awesome. Well, I was thinking, as we were going to have this conversation, like one of the cool things about this book is we don't necessarily need to talk about forms because you so seamlessly blend them in. But what you've done here with forms really should be sort of pointed out because it's incredibly impressive. And the fact that you are able to sort of almost hide the forms within what you're doing is even more impressive. So can you talk a little bit about the forms that you used in this book and also why and how you got there with them?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think it's especially an important question for a reading where the audience may not have the text in front of them because you kind of pick up on it, but you're right. I'm sneaking it in there a little bit, kind of like the veggies into the dish. And I think that, so the form that I'm working with is the Heroic Crown of Sonnets, and a sonnet is a 14-line poem, and then on top of that, it can have a rhyme scheme, it can have a metrical pattern. The first three sections in the book are blank verse, which the last section is blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter. The first three are free verse, and they're guided somewhat by kind of shape. The lines end up, kind of forming a loose block in the first and third sections. And then for this eco-poetics, environmental poetics section, I was really just pulled towards sparsity and towards kind of a having like one word per line, both as a gesture towards like conservation and what is it like to not use more than we need. And we think of poetry as kind of an economy of language. So how could I like wring the most out of each word, wring the most out of 14 lines as possible. And that just like gave me basically I was playing with constraints, and that just gave me like one, there we go. It's trying to blur it out. But those constraints, I find a lot of, when I'm stuck, I find a lot of constraints are like a puzzle. And I think I thought of this heroic crown form as very, I'd kind of describe it to friends as I was working on it as like word Sudoku, or like kind of crosswordy, in that everything has to lock into place. Everything has to work together. And so it also kind of satisfied a mathy part of my mind too. And then in that last section, that's in meter. So it's, if we think of iambic pentameter, it's doo-doo, 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 doo-doo. Like a non-stress, stress, non-stress, stress. And that, I was just like, let me throw some more monkey wrenches into the works, some more hoops to jump through. And I was working with found text from these Merrill Lynch, automated newsletter emails that I would receive. And so it was a way to be working with language, with words that weren't mine, while also having to put a lot of myself into the syntax and ordering of those words, I think is where that came from.
And you have an epigraph from James Merrill at the beginning that is, I yearn for the kind of unseasoned telling found in legends, fairy tales, a tone licked clean.
Yeah, I liked the idea of legends and fairy tales being kind of winked at or alluded to in this collection, because each of these are narrative. Like there's more of a narrative, more of a story arc, a longer story arc than in my past book. And so that was interesting to me to like be like, oh, I'm part of a narrative tradition now of legends and fairy tales too.
Let's see. There's a question here. So Bill said, I'm still wondering about the Crown of Sonnets form and the yearning for unseasoned telling in the Merrill epigraph. Seems to be some tension. Peter just went there, but not this question.
That's true, not this question. Bill, I think that there is tension there. And I think that like, as I was kind of welcoming Merrill in, and like I've done some scholarly work on Merrill, and so welcoming that in, he had a practice of channeling, Changing Light at Sandover, a practice of channeling voices and using that as dictation for poems. And so this was kind of doubling that, where I was like channeling Merrill himself, who's now passed on, is now a spirit and an ancestor, and inviting him in to be that channeled voice that shows up in the poems. It's certainly not unseasoned. I would say that what I'm doing is pretty seasoned, and at the same time, it's like poems of the lived world. These are not poems, like these are poems where we have like muffins and popcorn and Stairmasters, high and low.
And then Subaga, hi Subaga, Subaga Crystal Bacon, another BOA author. Thanks for being here, Subaga. Says, Alicia, I'm curious about the repetition of words in the series. Rough particularly in the first crown. Can you say something about how you decided to use repetition that way?
Sure. Yeah. So repetition is a professor that I had at the University of Denver, Eleni Sikelianos, taught me about essentially tagging characters through description. And that's not something that I had really thought much about in my standalone poems before, but as I was, again, like working on these longer narrative arcs, I needed some way for us to keep track of people. And I'm not really using names so much, names of friends or lovers, but I give them, I give them their own like descriptive character names. I give them epithets. And so rough became an epithet. Yeah, Jamie, like leitmotifs. There are epithets for characters. There are leitmotifs for like to signal place, to signal a relationship to perhaps time and space. And so repetition, and we're not talking about those repeated lines, structurally, but talking about like repeated descriptive imagery language, I think felt like a way to also be generous to my reader. And I think that I want a reader to feel like they're in on the joke or feel like they have the key to understanding, and to feel like as they read, when they recognize, oh, she's using rough again, or oh, violet has come back again, that the reader feels included and the reader's like, okay, I know what's going on here. I've heard that before. So ideally a way to make someone who is not me and was not in my brain, to give them kind of blazes on the trail to follow.
And I'm really curious about the spark that led you from Merrill to the Merrill Lynch emails. How did that sort of transition happen?
That's a great question. So I read this big, beautiful James Merrill biography by Langdon Hammer that's on the bookshelf. And I'd been like reading Merrill's work in my PhD program, reading to learn from his poems, but I was interested because Merrill was the gay kid of a Wall Street businessman. And I too am the gay kid of a Wall Street businessman. And Merrill likely passed away from complications of HIV/AIDS. And I have done some studying on like poetry of the HIV epidemic. So I wanted to get to know more about him beyond just being a poet, but who he was as a person. And when I put together that like James Merrill was the son of Charles Merrill, and Charles Merrill is the Merrill of Merrill Lynch, and I was getting emails from a Merrill Lynch account, I was like, it could be yes, it's all a coincidence, but also the poet has to make use of those things. So, and I was curious about appropriated language and kind of subverting the power, especially in like a capitalist, it's a bank. Like, how could I subvert that institutional power and take banking language and make it poetry?
Which you did.
Sure.
I'm curious if after working with these forms so much, are you still writing sonnets, or has your brain stuck in sonnet form, or are you moving to some other form? Or?
When I feel stuck in writing, I like form, but I think this is more like traditional form than I am naturally drawn to. This also solved the quintessential second book problem of like, I said everything I had to say in that first book. What do I write now? And so doing this problem solving work was a great thing to make the like, what do I write now question. And I think at the moment I'm back in more of a free verse mode, but I also think that free verse poems, to a thoughtful reader, you find all sorts of work with poetics in there, even if it's not regimented. You recognize slant rhyme, you recognize assonance and consonance, you recognize moments of slipping into regular rhythm, you recognize moments of internal rhyme. So I have like a classic prosody education that informs my free verse poems too.
I love, and you talk in different poems about teaching, and you talk some specifically about teaching, going from teaching college to teaching little kids, and I can just hear the way you describe your own work. I'm sure it really translates well to being able to describe that to kids and explain it to them. I'm just curious, have you worked with kids like with forms like this specifically?
That's a great question. I haven't worked with little kids with sonnets, but I've worked with students, with like older students in doing more clear form, and some people take to it and delight in it, and some people the homework feels like homework, and both are just fine. Like both are ways of pushing and pulling with constraints. When I've worked with little kids, the prompts have been more, I think, about more content driven. So it's been more about like, oh, write us a poem that tells us how we walk, like how we get to your house, or write us a poem that tells us, kind of poems that help us get to know their creative little minds. And as you know from working with little kids, they write some of the most incredible poems because their brains are making wild connections that have not yet been dampened by adult logic.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I always like to give people an opportunity, if there's any like poets that you're reading now or books that you're reading, is there anything you'd like to share with people that you're enamored with at the moment?
Well, we have such an incredible roster of new BOAAT books this season. So I got some sneak peeks when I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, but Margaret Ray's book is awesome. Grab Subaga's book, grab all of the, they're like, Marcelo's book is beautiful. There are a lot of really impressive works coming out from this press, and I feel really lucky to be a BOAAT poet, and especially in Poetry Month. And then my best friend Kaylin Capra-Thomas is a poet who writes with such humor. I'll plug her name in the chat. She had a book out last summer called Iguana, and we grew up together as poets, and it is full of heartbreak and humor and witty language play, and she's, aside from being a great friend, I think our poems, our poetry echoes one another, so that's a plug.
Excellent. And that title and poet's name are now in our chat, so thank you for sharing that. Iguana. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, and I'm so pleased that BOAAT published Four in Hand. It's a beautiful book, and we're so happy to have you in the BOAAT family. If you wouldn't mind sharing one last poem, I am going to say goodnight to you and everybody, and thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. I'll read one more poem for us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This was a great way to kick things off. And I'll have, if you just need some more, I'll have another reading tomorrow afternoon. I think it's like 4:30 Eastern time, and then some in-person New York City readings. And shoot me an email and get me to come to your town too. This will be the last poem of the first section. So this is the last poem in Traintown Howl. In a winter dream months ago, whatever most right was, it waited between us, held tight like too much hope. I would never try to coax you from the shore I couldn't start to see. Believe the less terrible. Even when it's true, this book is a monument to touch. However quick, however long it lasts. Remember my body, the folded map of it. Whomever you love, they belong beside you, lying in your honest kind of shade. Somewhere inside me, there's a swarm keeping quiet when I want to howl. What you buried can't be driven out of me. Thank you, everyone. Grab a copy of the book, grab a couple copies, and send it along to people who might like it.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and thank you, Peter, for joining us tonight. And thank you to everyone who came to the event. If you're interested in getting the book, the link is in the chat. And yeah, just thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed the reading tonight. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.